Video games and video game mods have gone together since the early 80s. Pretty much every video game has a mod, and some mods have even been turned into video games. With pretty much endless possibilities for mods, it makes sense that the history of modding and hacking has some pretty interesting parts to it. Today we'll be taking a look at the video game mods and hacks iceberg. If you don't know how an iceberg works, let me be the first one to welcome you to your first day on YouTube. But really, starting off at the top of the iceberg is information that most people know, and as you move farther down, things get more obscure and sometimes a bit more disturbing. This is an iceberg that I made based on some research that I did, as well as a couple other icebergs and a couple videos that I pulled some information from as talking points. We'll be looking at game console hacking, mods for video games, and some events that happened that had to do with modding. I do need to give a quick content warning before we move in. Near the bottom of this iceberg, there are some disturbing topics. We'll get into some real life stuff and just overall gross things. So if that's not for you, I get it. You'll probably want to skip out on the lower tiers. With that being said, let's jump into tier 1 of the video game modding and hacking iceberg. Friday Night Funkin'. This is a prime example of a game with a very dedicated modding community. Friday Night Funkin' is a rhythm game that's very similar to other games like Parappa the Rapper. The thing that really helps Friday Night Funkin' stand out is how easy it is to mod. Just scrolling through the game's Game Banana page, we can see a new mod gets posted once about every 10 minutes, and there are currently 18,000 new skins and 10,000 new songs. The developers right now are working on a full game, but I think it's going to be pretty difficult for them to be able to keep up with the amount of mods that are coming out daily for the game. Game Sharks. Game Sharks got pretty popular around the late 90s, early 2000s as a way to cheat in games and hack your console. Infinite lives in Mario, whatever legendary Pokemon you want, this thing could do it all. As more and more Game Sharks were releasing for more consoles, the capabilities kept rising. People were able to start accessing unused content in the game, and they found things like an old island on GoldenEye 007. They were able to rip music from games, images, a lot of 3D model type stuff. It's standard from what you see nowadays, but at the time, it was pretty difficult. There was even a GameShark Pro that let people go into the code of the game and change out certain parts. People would spend hours or even days changing just one letter in the code or one number in the code that would allow them to have a different effect when they were working in the game. Modding was primarily done on PCs at this time, but the GameShark helped modders move onto the consoles a lot easier than it would have normally been. Amnesia: The Dark Descent. If you were on YouTube back in 2010, there's no way that you don't know Amnesia. This is the game that helped get PewDiePie to where he is now. This was partially due to the game's custom stories, which were essentially just mods for Amnesia. The game engine for Amnesia got released as well as a ton of other tools, so it made it super easy for pretty much anybody to create their own story in Amnesia. These stories got super in-depth, they changed dialogue, characters, added new storylines, so once you downloaded a custom story, you could pretty much expect to play a brand new game. These were so popular that Frictional Games actually held a competition back in 2011 for the best custom story. I think one highlight from this is the winner of the most unique category, where they just remade the full game of Tetris running in the Amnesia engine. Without Amnesia and its huge array of custom stories, it's safe to assume that YouTube probably wouldn't be where it's at. Dream speedrun controversy. In late 2020, Minecraft YouTuber and amazing musician Dream posted an incredible 19-minute run in Minecraft 1.6. He got some pretty insane luck on some RNG that allowed him to land 5th place in his category. That's when people started to get a little suspicious. On December 11th of 2020, what I can only assume as the speedrunning equivalent of a Harvard graduate posted a 29-page document basically saying that Dream cheated. I mean, look at this paper. If I would have submitted anything half as decent as this when I was in school, I'd probably be at a 6-figure job right now instead of being a YouTuber discussing an iceberg. After this paper came out, Dream hired his own statistician to run some numbers and basically prove that he didn't cheat. After a couple tests, the statistician basically said, yeah, he probably cheated. Eventually, Dream learned that a mod was running while he was playing the game that would allow higher drop rates on certain things that are very important for speedruns. Dream apologized and pretty much everybody moved on, but that one simple mod helped tarnish somebody's reputation. His speedrunning record was taken away, which is pretty sad because now all he's left with is 20 million subscribers, ton of fans, a lot of money, and a bottle of normal pills. Been drowned. Been Drowned is an iconic and probably one of the most famous creepypastas about a haunted video game cartridge. Equally as iconic are the videos that supplemented the story by giving visual proof of what's happening. Even if you don't know the original story, chances are you probably know this face. These videos helped elevate the original story from just another internet post to something that people believed was real, due largely in part to the hacking that helped achieve these videos. The creator of the story was asked how the videos were made, and he said that he used some really obscure GameShark codes that allowed him to change audio, animations, textures, pretty much everything that would go into modding. Though it's pretty obvious now that this is just the result of some really good modding, when the video first got posted it tricked a lot of people into believing it was real. Just looking through the comments on the original video, we can see how many people came back to say they never realized the video was fake until they returned, which just goes to show how powerful modding can be. Garry's Mod. Garry's Mod is a game that started off as a mod for game engines that made games that could be modded. Are you keeping up? There's gonna be a test. But for real, Garry's Mod is most well known for things like Prop Hunt and being a great way to make the weirdest little movies you can think of. But not everybody knows Garry's Mod actually started off as a mod, even though that's the name. The creator Gary Newman stated that he wasn't skilled enough to make an actual game from the source engine, which is the engine that runs Valve games like Half-Life 2, so he had to make it a mod instead. The mod really started to take off, and Gary hired some people as a team in order to make it a full game. The creators of the source engine reached out to Gary, and they eventually came to the agreement that they would release Gary's game onto their game buying website Steam, which maybe you've heard of. I feel like I'm saying the word mod too much. I'm just gonna call it Gary's game from now on. Games like Prop Hunt are actually mods for Gary's game, meaning that you could play a mod in a game that's a mod that's called Garry's Mod. Okay, I'll stop. Toby Fox. Even though he's most well known as the creator of the hugely popular RPG Undertale, Toby Fox actually got his first little bit of recognition from ROM hacks. If you don't know, a ROM hack is basically just a mod that changes a huge part of art, story, even gameplay. It's kind of similar to an Amnesia custom story where you would essentially get a new game running in the old engine. His most famous ROM hack is the Earthbound Halloween hack, which I'm sure is important in some way and has some really cool stuff, but the only thing that matters is the fact that it includes a version of Megalovania that predated Undertale. Someone uploaded the song from the hack to YouTube in 2009, and the description is encouraging Toby Fox to keep making those awesome hacks. I hope that guy's proud. Nexus Mods. Nexus Mods is currently the biggest website on the internet to get mods, with over 32 million users and 5 billion downloads. Nexus Mods came under some controversy when it stated that it would be implementing a system that made it so if you download a mod, any other mod that may be required will also be downloaded. So, why is this controversial? Well, to do this, they made it so that a mod is never truly deleted, even if the creator deleted it. Basically, even if a modder wanted their mod gone, it would still be able to be downloaded if it was part of another person's package. This also led to some ethical questions when you take into account the fact that modders on Nexus Mods could actually get paid for their work. Modding getting involved obviously makes things a lot more complicated. There was a donation system where the site would take a pool of money and split it between the creators, but what happens to a creator who leaves the site but still has mods being used? This new system made it a lot easier to just skip over the original author's page, so direct donations got a lot more difficult to have happen. This new system actually led to a ton of modders leaving the site, most notably a Skyrim modder that had over 30 million downloads. From what I can tell, the site is still going with this, but anything can happen in the future. Valve. Okay, I know this point is a bit vague, but let me explain. Valve is known for publishing some extremely popular games in the 2010s, like Counter-Strike, Half-Life, Team Fortress 2. However, a lot of Valve's most well-known games actually started off as mods, and a lot of games actually came from Valve games. Scrolling through the Wikipedia article for games derived from mods, it makes me think that maybe every game in existence is just some modified version of Half-Life. At this point, I feel like Valve just takes all their games and puts them into some kind of AI, and it pumps out a new game that can be added to the list. I guess it saves on resources to essentially just release a reskin version of a game from 2009, but man, that Valve family tree must be crazy. Everyone keeps asking for Half-Life 3, but at this point I feel like we're on Half-Life like 20. Project M. This entry refers to the extremely popular mod for Super Smash Bros. Brawl that did what Nintendo was too scared to do with the game: make Brawl actually playable. They added tweaks to characters, new characters, and basically turned Brawl into what hardcore fans thought it should have been instead of the more casual game that was originally released. People consider this the essential way to play Brawl, especially if you're trying to do anything competitively. This mod has inspired a ton of other mods for Brawl, most notably Project M Remix Edition. This mod has almost 100 characters. That is more than Smash Ultimate. This mod shows the insane lengths that fans will go for a game that they love. Nintendo shuts down Big House. Hey, while we're talking about Smash mods, let's talk about this one. Super Smash Bros. Is an extremely popular game in the competitive fighting category, and Melee is at the top of that list. Since Melee came out in 2001, it's pretty obvious that there was no online play built into the original game. That's where the Slippy mod comes in. It allows Melee to be played online and is the main reason that competitions like the Big House can do what they do. Usually the competition would be played in person, but with events happening in 2020, it made it so that it wasn't possible. They had to quickly adapt, and they decided to use the Slippy mod to host an online tournament for Melee. That's when Nintendo hit them with the old Nintendo Special. A cease and desist. Nintendo was quoted as saying they had to shut down the competition because the tournament required the use of illegally obtained copies of the game as well as the mod. Listen, I get that Nintendo has to protect their IPs, but this game is literally old enough to drink alcohol. Yeah, technically they would be losing out on money with an illegal copy being used, but maybe if we all put a couple dollars in the pot, then we can call it even. This is one of many examples of Nintendo not being too hot on mods, and it doesn't seem like they're gonna slow down on taking down other people's mods. By the way, Nintendo, if you're watching, I don't mod Animal Crossing. You're thinking of a different channel. Please don't sue me. Hot Coffee mod. Probably the most controversial mod in gaming. Grand Theft Auto San Andreas released in 2004, and hackers pretty quickly found out that there was some, unused content in the game. These hackers created a mod that allowed players to access a hidden minigame, which depicted the main character CJ and his girlfriend doing what adult video game characters do when they love each other. Even though it technically wasn't in the game, it was still in the game, and anybody who knew how to mod could easily see two cartoon characters really just going at it. Obviously, this led to some backlash. It turns out Rockstar originally hid this minigame because they were scared that the game was going to get slapped with an adults-only rating, which is very ironic because once the mod was found, it was changed from an M to an AO. And listen, I totally get the reason for the outrage. You should be focused on killing people, committing violence, hitting cops with cars, robbing stores. Where was I going with this? So yeah, this mod led to more discussions of video games and their effect on children, and led to the ESRB having to crack down a lot harder on rating games. So next time your mom has to be there when you want to buy Fortnite, just keep this mod in the back of your mind. Miss Pac-Man. Miss Pac-Man is arguably just as iconic, if not more iconic, than her husband. When the original Pac-Man released, it was hugely successful in arcades and then eventually came to home consoles. As is true with most games that get insanely popular, Pac-Man started to get modded. One mod for the game, titled Crazy Auto, caught the attention of the publishers Midway. So when they were presented with the mod, Midway bought the rights to Crazy Auto and changed the name 4 times before settling on Miss Pac-Man. I don't know, to me 4 times seems like way too many times to change the name of a game about a female Pac-Man to Miss Pac-Man. As of 1995, Miss Pac-Man has done about $1.5 billion in sales, which isn't too bad for a game that started off as a mod. WAD files. A WAD, or Where's All the Data file, is a file type that was used in the first 2 Doom games and a couple other games. Before these files were introduced, modding a game was a lot more difficult and wasn't as common, but because of the way that WAD files were set up, more people felt comfortable attempting to create mods. Basically, WAD files contained 2 different folders, one that made games run and the other that housed the mods. So you could put a new sprite in the mod folder. Once the game booted up, it would search through the mod folder and replace whatever sprite you put in there over the original game, but it didn't touch the original game. This was extremely important because instead of risking breaking your game by replacing files needed to run the game, it was all contained in a separate area. Even though WAD files specifically have gone away, the idea lives on in modern hacking. For example, a hacked Nintendo Switch has a ROM-FS folder which functions in pretty much the exact same way as a WAD file does. WAD files didn't invent modding, but they helped a lot to get modding to where it is today. RCM jig. So this is an RCM jig. This tiny piece of plastic is the key to hacking into a Nintendo Switch. They come as complex as a 3D printed jig or as simple as a paperclip, and you can even turn your Joy-Con into an RCM jig if you really feel like possibly destroying a $60 controller. This feels like a good time to mention that you can get these for like $4 on Amazon. This also feels like a good time to mention that I don't condone you hack your Switch. That's right, don't come for me, Nintendo. These two metal pieces will touch certain parts on the actual Switch console, and after a whole bunch of complicated steps to get it to work, you can finally turn your favorite Animal Crossing character green. Also, side note, they sell these things on Walmart's website. Like, yeah, I know it's a third-party seller and it doesn't come directly from Walmart, but I still feel like there's some potential for some legal stuff. Thomas the Tank Engine. If you go on Nexus Mods and search up Thomas the Tank Engine, you'll see a weirdly high amount of mods that replace things in games with Thomas the Tank Engine from the show of the same name. Resident Evil, Kingdom Hearts, Cyberpunk, it seems like no game is safe from having Thomas added to it. To explain, in 2013, a modder made it so that all the dragons in Skyrim would be replaced with Thomas the Tank Engine. After this, trend started popping up where Thomas would make his way into games that he really had no business of being in. And if you think this joke would have gotten old after a decade, may I present to you Thomas the Tank Engine in Elden Ring. That's right, some people have been adding Thomas to games for nearly 10 years. That's older than some people watching. Modding copyright. This entry refers to the legal gray area when it comes to modding copyright, and more specifically, nobody knows who owns a mod. Does it belong to the game company since it's still part of their game, or does it belong to the modder because they're the ones who made it? I'm not here to answer that question because, frankly, I don't know. There's articles online that are for both sides, and it's pretty difficult to get a clear answer either way. Things get even more complicated once you bring in paid mods. Should a portion of that paid mod go to the publisher? Do modders get to keep it all since they rightfully bought the game? Modding is a complicated legal rabbit hole that I'm sure is just a headache for all companies, so that's probably why there's not too many that get involved in paid mods. Valve paid mods controversy. Hey, remember how like a couple seconds ago I was just saying that companies and paid mods don't work well together? Let's talk about Valve. So in 2015, Valve decided to introduce mods that you can download straight from Steam to Skyrim. What makes things interesting was the fact that the creator of the mod could put it behind a paywall, and if their mod exploded in popularity, it could line their pockets. Except, not really. As we all know, host sites typically take a portion of whatever sales go through. From YouTube to Etsy, it's pretty standard. The backlash comes from the fact that Valve was reportedly taking 75% of the money that users paid for the mods. Now this is obviously because Valve had to pay the publisher of the game as well as themselves, but I think it's pretty clear that this wasn't favorable to anybody. Modders would have to charge an extremely high price to get a worthwhile amount of money in return, and of course most of that was still just going to another place. Other issues got presented, like the fact that people could just go steal a free mod from another website and then monetize it on the Steam Workshop. And people had questions like, what would happen if you bought a mod that just stopped working? Do you get your money back? Do you not get your money back because you already played the mod? The paid mod system on Steam lasted a whopping 4 days before it got shut down, which really just goes to show you that adding money and mods to game publishers really makes things a lot more complicated. LSPDFR. LSPDFR, short for Los Santos Police Department First Responders, is a mod for Grand Theft Auto 5 that allows players to take control of the cops in the game. This is a huge mod that really feels like it could be its own game. There's something weirdly fun about getting to play as the people who normally chase you around in the main game. This mod has gotten so big that there are dedicated servers that are invite only where people roleplay as the cops and criminals. Some of these servers are extremely difficult to get into, and there's YouTubers like Bay Area Bugs that rack in some insane views for their videos where they roleplay. I don't really have a ton to say about this one, I just thought it was interesting how much work got put into a free mod, and the fact that people gravitate so much to a game where you play as a cop in a game about criminals. Anti-piracy screens. I'm sure most fans of my channel know what an anti-piracy screen is, but for those of you who don't, an anti-piracy screen is used in games that are illegally copied and play without owning the original copy. Developers put these anti-piracy screens in as a way to educate and sometimes scare players who were playing pirated versions of the game. In 2020, there was a huge resurgence of anti-piracy screens popping up on YouTube. From Mario Party to Superman 64, it seemed like more and more people were discovering anti-piracy screens in games, whether they were old or new. So, what does this have to do with the modding iceberg? Well, of course, most of the videos that were posted in 2020 were fake. Though anti-piracy screens were a real thing, most of the videos showcasing anti-piracy screens were done through the use of modding and hacking. I can't speak for every video out there on anti-piracy, but I do know that the ones that I've posted have been done by going into the game's code and changing dialogue, textures, everything like that. While anti-piracy screens aren't obscure, the fact that they're fake is much less common knowledge, which is why I put it this low on the iceberg. Go on most high-quality anti-piracy screen videos, and in the comments, most people think that it's just a screen recording of a real thing and not just a very thorough mod and edit. Castle Smurfenstein. When you think of the first ever game mod, what do you think it would be? Maybe a new color for the ball in Pong? Make Pac-Man a square? How about a mod for the game Castle Wolfenstein that turns all the Nazi enemies in the game into Smurfs? That's right, what many people believe to be the first ever game mod is a way for people to shoot Smurfs in a castle. You play as Smurf Butcher Bob, very fitting name, and you butcher some Smurfs. By today's standards, this mod isn't that crazy, but thinking about the fact that this was in the early 80s, a mod that changed all the characters in the game and turned it into a new game was pretty much completely unheard of. There's a website for Dead Smurf Software, who is the team that developed the mod, and it has some pretty interesting information about how the mod came to be. But most importantly, it has this picture of a Smurf getting shot with the text, "Dead meat, eh?" next to it, and that's great. Maybe that whole Thomas the Tank Engine trend wasn't really that weird when you consider where mods came from. Brain Age. If you spent any time browsing the Wii U eShop, you probably noticed that Brain Age was constantly topping the charts. This was probably also confusing because at the time of the Wii U's launch, Brain Age was 7 years old. So why was an old DS game beating out modern classics like Minecraft or Breath of the Wild? Was it really that good? Maybe. But it's probably because of hacking. Modders found out that they were able to hack the Wii U, but to do it they needed an officially bought DS game. Since Brain Age was the cheapest DS game that would work, it would make sense that Brain Age would eventually become a chart topper for the system. This is funny because I just imagine people who have no idea about hacking scrolling through and seeing Brain Age always beating out other games like Mario Kart 8 and wondering what's going on. There are other games that do similar stuff like Flipnote Studio on the DSi, and honestly, I'm just happy for the developers. You guys get that money however you can. Unhackable Xbox One. Just as the name suggests, the Xbox One is the only modern console to have never been hacked. PlayStations, Nintendo consoles, even the original Xbox and Xbox 360s have all been hacked in some way. So what makes the Xbox One so special? Well, there's a couple reasons why it hasn't been hacked. Microsoft is a company that makes software, so it makes sense that they would be able to make the Xbox a lot harder to get into than other consoles. They learned a lot from the Xbox 360 in terms of hacking, and they built the Xbox One with certain features that make hacking much more difficult. Microsoft also added a developer mode that made things a lot easier for hackers just to get in and do whatever they want without having to actually mod the console. But even if modders wanted to hack the console, things like separating apps and security as well as making you can't run code while you're in developer mode made it almost not worth hacking the console. Maybe eventually the Xbox One will get jailbroken, but as of right now, it's pretty notorious for being unhackable. Cyber Voice. A Night to Remember is a mod for the extremely popular open world game The Witcher 3. It added some new content to the game and gained a lot of attention for one thing in particular: using Cyber Voice. Cyber Voice is a software that allows for an AI to study someone's voice and deliver lines that sound like the subject it was studying. Here's a comparison between the AI voice actor and the real voice actor from The Witcher.
"A Witcher, heard you wondering about my swords. I'll come back for you one day. You realize that, right?"
This AI is so convincing that you could pretty much make a full game using only AI voices, which made a lot of voice actors very nervous. Natalie Winter, who gave her voice for Assassin's Creed Valhalla, was quoted as saying, "There's the knee-jerk concern of it's going to take our jobs, and I do believe in some cases that will happen." Obviously, AI-generated voice acting isn't perfect, but this mod showed that it was getting pretty close, and it made a lot of people very nervous. Resident Evil 1.5. As we all know, video games take a lot of time and effort to make. That's what the developers of Resident Evil 2 realized after they decided to scrap their first attempt at the game and start completely over. The game was already about 70% complete, but once the original Resident Evil started picking up, the developers realized that what they were working on just wasn't going to cut it. The only problem was the game was supposed to release in 1997, which was the same year they decided to start over. They had to quickly rush to make the new game, but in doing so, they couldn't really get rid of the old game and the code. This meant that when hackers got their hands on the game, they could see the remnants of the old game, which was dubbed Resident Evil 1.5 or Biohazard 1.5. That's when a group of dedicated modders and hackers decided they were going to do what Capcom decided not to do in 1997. released the original game. They took whatever they could from the game's hidden code as well as old footage of the game before it was scrapped and put together a fully playable version of Resident Evil 1.5. The best part is you can download this mod right now for free and see some of the stuff that got cut. I mean, come on, look at this weird man spider thing, and they've got this terrifying zombie ape. Alright, maybe that was a good choice to take that one out. Malicious mods. As we all know, you need to be careful while you're on the internet. Anytime that someone can take advantage of someone clicking a link, they will. We see it plenty on sketchy advertisements, spam emails, and yes, even video game mods. People can put whatever they want into the files of the mod that you just downloaded, and some people use that as a way to spread malware and various other things that you really don't want on your computer. One example of this is a series of mods for the game City Skylines. A group of downloads on the Steam Workshop from a user named Chaos were deleted after people who downloaded the mod saw that it made their game run a lot worse. When other modders took a look at the files, they saw that there was some code in there that would allow Chaos to send malware to people's computer once the mod was downloaded. People then started to accuse the mod of mining cryptocurrency or keylogging, but Steam denied this claim. One of the other mods posted by Chaos did have malicious intent, but it wasn't really as bad. They made a list of people they didn't like and made it so if those people downloaded the mod, it would just make their game run horribly. There's not too much more to say about this one, just make sure you know where you're getting your mods from. JVK1166Z.ESP. The last entry showed us that we need to be careful when downloading stuff off the internet, and this entry is going to show us that we need to be extremely careful whenever people send us mods directly. Some users that frequented Elder Scrolls role-playing groups found that they had been sent a pretty interesting looking mod to try out called JVK1166Z.ESP. The users booted up the mod, but they realized that if they tried to run the game with the mod installed, all that would happen was their computer would be crashing and all of their save file would be gone. The mod was warned about to be dangerous, but eventually people figured out that the mod actually worked when you ran it on an emulator. But once again, things still weren't right. At the start of the game, all the main quest NPCs were dead and your character was constantly losing health. All of the other characters never spoke, and they started bleeding from their eyes, and it's a creepypasta. It's a pretty standard haunted version of a game story, but it does have some pretty good moments. There are files floating around that actually claim to be the mod based off the creepypasta, but I can't speak to the validity of them because I've read too many articles about mods that were just viruses. I'd like to once again give a warning that Tier 5 is going to house some stuff that people might not be comfortable with. We're going to be talking about some real life tragedies, and there's going to be some stuff that's just a little gross overall, so if you want to skip out on it, no hard feelings. There's also going to be some creepy images shown, obviously nothing from real life and nothing that messed up, but there are going to be some images from some of the games that we'll be talking about. So feel free to skip to the outro if you don't feel like watching this part, but for those of you that have been looking forward to this, let's get into it. Devourment. I really wanted to avoid talking about stuff that's already been covered in other people's icebergs, but I could not skip Devourment. I'll give sort of an abridged version, but if you want to hear the full story, go watch Parallel Pipe's video on it. It goes much more in depth than I will, and the story is so weird. So basically, a modder had a fetish for vor, which is where somebody gets eaten and the person who ate them has a huge round stomach. As is true with most modders with a fetish, they put that mod in Skyrim. The modder, who went by Vegan, had a rule with their mod that nobody was allowed to edit the mod, mainly so that nobody could play as a male character. Eventually things went dark with the mod and nobody knew what happened to Vegan. Then in early 2015 they made a post basically stating that their family found out about their fetish and couldn't continue working on the mod. But instead of just giving up like anybody else, Vegan intended to come back, and their plan was, and I quote, "pretend to be born again through the grace of Christ and cured of their fetish." Vegan was gone for about 4 years, and in that time people got their hands on it and, yeah, you guessed it, edited it to have male characters. Eventually, Vegan actually did come back, and once they saw that the one rule for their mod was broken, they had a full breakdown and also threatened people with a cease and desist. Like I said, I just gave the quick version. If you want to hear all of the posts read out, go watch Parallel Pipes. I just couldn't skip over this one. Air Cruel version. Alright, you'll have to forgive me because this one technically is not a mod or a hack. This one's going to be a little tough for me to explain because there's not really a lot of information out there regarding this one, and most of the information that is out there is in Japanese. So I want to give a huge thank you to Melanchola on Twitter for making a thread about this game and giving me a bit more insight into what was going on with this entry. Air was a visual novel game that was released in 2000 as something that Wikipedia refers to as an adult game. I'll let you fill in the gaps for what that means. The game was re-released with the adult content removed, and while you may think that Air Cruel version is referring to the original version of the game, it's actually not. Something of an urban legend started, referring to this cruel version of Air. I haven't been able to find a straight answer as to what actually exists within this version of the game, but most people can agree that it was a lot bloodier. The story goes that either a group of fans who disliked the creators or the actual company itself made a version of Air that was disturbing, and eventually a couple copies even made their way onto store shelves. A couple different games have come out that people say is the cruel version of Air, but most of these prove to be different games or not the cruel version of Air as stated by the creators. Though it's not totally impossible, it's pretty likely that this is just a scary story passed around on the internet until it moved so far that people believed it. Like I said, information is pretty scarce online, so if you have any information, please let me know in the comments. Stellaris Whites Only mod. Stellaris is a space-themed strategy game that was released in 2016 to very high praise. The game was well received for the design of the characters that players could choose to be, and there was a ton of customization options for players to get the character they wanted. This mod aimed to change that. Dubbed the European Phenotype and Names Only (White Humans) mod, it was made to make all the characters in the game white. This mod got removed once the publishers Paradox heard about it and investigated, but it probably wasn't removed for the reason that you think. Paradox stated that the contents of the mod were completely fine, but the issue came in the description of the download page. The only screenshot I could find of the description was this one, which shows the mod stating, "No multiculturalism here." As you can probably guess, the comments on the original mod got a little bit out of hand and there was some racist statements and slurs being passed around. The COO of Paradox issued a statement where she said, "We welcome everyone to create all kinds of mods for us as long as they comply with our rules of conduct, and we expect our modders to help us keep the comment sections free of any racial slurs and other things that do not comply with these same codes." So it's pretty clear why this mod got removed. However, this removal led to even more controversy, with people wondering why Paradox didn't do the same thing for other mods that were similar but about different races. The mod got re-uploaded 24 hours later, and the creator began moderating comments and deleting anything deemed inappropriate. But at that point, the damage had already been done to both sides. Sonderkommando Revolt. Sonderkommandos were Jewish prisoners during the Holocaust that were forced to do tasks with things that included stuff like disposing of bodies and cleaning up in the concentration camps. Sonderkommando Revolt was a total conversion of the game Wolfenstein 3D that would have let you play as a Sonderkommando revolting against the Nazis set in a concentration camp. This obviously led to some controversy. People questioned the historical accuracy and general distastefulness of the mod. The creator of the mod believed that in a past life he was a Sonderkommando, and this mod was a way for him to sort of explore that. When the first trailer of the mod was released, it garnered a ton of attention, a lot more than the team thought, and it quickly threw them into the spotlight. Even though the creator had good intent, they received a ton of backlash and it started to affect their personal lives. Local newspapers and TV stations reported on it, and the creator was at risk of losing their job, which even led to a prank show calling the creator's job and putting them on a live radio. Due to the effect that it was having on their personal lives, the creator decided to cancel and scrap the mod and then apologize for it. Maybe if things had been done a little bit more tastefully, then the backlash would have been minimal, but I think it's pretty clear why people got upset. Sims 4 Custom Content Doxing. The Sims is a franchise that is hugely popular, especially in the modding scene. EA is extremely tolerant of mods and even encourages it in most cases. People who love The Sims tend to put in a ton of time on their mods, and as such, typically post their mods to places like Patreon so they can be appropriately compensated. While other companies might try to regulate the way mods are being shared or take 75%, EA just had one simple rule: the mods need to be free. In a statement from EA, they said mods cannot be locked behind a paywall, but users were allowed to put their mods up on their Patreons for about 2 to 3 weeks as an early access to the mod before it went live for free. This seemed like it should work out well for everybody. Modders could be compensated for their works without any intervention from other parties, users that couldn't afford to pay could still get the mod after waiting for a bit, and EA didn't have to worry about regulating mods. But of course, people take advantage of this on both sides. Some modders started to have their early access periods go longer and longer, even going forever in some cases, while users started sharing some of the paid content to people who never paid for it. This is where things start to get a little ugly. Certain creators started putting trackers into their mods, and if it was found that content was getting shared, they would release the user's name, payment information, and even location. These users doxed a ton of people in the community, and there's plenty of first-hand stories from people who bought these mods and suddenly had their information leaked online. The best part of this story is the fact that one of the modders who was doxing people actually was found out to be stealing assets from other people's mods, so they were doxing people over stuff that wasn't even theirs. This story's pretty wild, and there's a lot more information that I couldn't touch on in this video, but if you want to read more about it, I'll leave the link to the article in the description. And that was the video game Mods and Hacks Iceberg. It was really interesting doing research for this, and there was a lot of stuff that I learned and a lot of stuff I kind of wish I could unlearn. I know that icebergs aren't my usual type of content, but I just decided to switch it up because I was getting a little bit tired of doing what I usually do. I'm not saying that I'm completely done with it, I just wanted a little bit of a break from it, and I thought that this would be something interesting that a lot of people might be interested in seeing. If you like this iceberg video, please let me know, and if you want me to make any more iceberg videos, definitely let me know because I probably will end up doing it anyway in the future. But other than that, thank you guys for making it this far, and I'll see you in the next one.